Patricia Patsy McQueen came from a large family. She regularly made her parents, 6 sisters, and 4 brothers laugh with her witty jokes or clever pranks. She loved sports, baseball in particular, and music. Her family remembers her constantly dancing and singing at home. Even at just 14 years old, she was very strong and independent, with dreams of traveling the world once she was older. Patsy was popular and had many friends. One of those friends was Dvorak, who was in grade 9 with Patsy at Ian Bazalgette Junior High School in Calgary, Alberta. Eva was bright and bubbly and shared Patsy's love of music. She never sat still, singing and dancing at all times of day. She loved roller skating, swimming, and ice skating, especially with her sisters and cousins. The 2 14-year-olds were last seen alive on Valentine's Day of 1976, walking in downtown Calgary. At approximately 10:45 the following morning, February 15th, a man driving to Cochrane, Alberta, spotted the bodies of the 2 girls lying face down in the snow under the Happy Valley overpass on Highway 1, west of Calgary. The scene was surprisingly calm, given the circumstances. There were no signs of a struggle, the girls' clothes were undisturbed, and there was no obvious physical damage done to them. Tire tracks in the snow were the only obvious clue at the scene. Semen was found on Patsy and Eva's bodies during their autopsies. Alberta's chief medical examiner found that they had both died of asphyxia, but argued that they had died in some sort of drug-related incident rather than at someone else's hand. A coroner's jury was held, but reached no conclusion over the nature of the girls' deaths, so they were ruled sudden deaths rather than as homicides. More than 45 years after the girls were killed, their deaths were linked to 2 other homicides. DNA testing had not been available to investigators in 1976, but the semen found on the girls was preserved. In 2022, the evidence from their case was resubmitted to the lab and a DNA profile from the semen was developed. When it was run through police databases, investigators learned that the same DNA profile had been found on the bodies of 2 other young women who had been killed in Calgary, one in 1976 and the other in 1977, just over a year after Eva and Patsy were killed. Melissa Rehorek was a native of Windsor, Ontario, but her love of adventure took her to Western Canada. In 1976, 20-year-old Melissa was living in the YWCA in Calgary and working as a housekeeper at the International Hotel, although she was hoping to soon get a job in childcare. Whenever she had a break from work, she loved to explore. She had come to Alberta because of her love of the outdoors and her desire to see all of the natural beauty Canada had to offer. Banff National Park, west of Calgary, was one of her favorite places to visit. On September 15, 1976, one of Melissa's roommates at the YWCA saw her leaving with some of her toiletries packed up in a red shopping bag. She had a few days off from work and planned to hitchhike out of the city. Melissa never made it to the mountains as planned. The following morning, her body was found in a ditch alongside a gravel road, approximately 13 miles west of Calgary, by motorists as they drove by. There were obvious signs of a struggle at the scene: displaced gravel on the road, a man's shoe print in nearby dirt, and a clump of long dark hair clutched in Melissa's hand. The medical examiner determined that Melissa had been punched in the head, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death. Nothing was stolen from her, and her wallet with cash inside was found with her body. According to her brother Jim, 19-year-old Barbara McLean was full of life and smart as hell. In early 1977, she was enjoying her first real taste of life outside of her hometown. Barbara was from the rural community of Inverness, Nova Scotia, a small, former mining community that had few options available to her once she finished high school. Barbara was very independent and wanted the chance to stand on her own 2 feet without the help of her parents. However, family was very important to her, so when she did leave Inverness, she moved in with her 2 brothers in Calgary and got a job at a bank there. She did miss her parents and eventually began feeling homesick, so she planned a 2-week trip back home for the beginning of March 1977. She also reportedly had plans to move back home later in the year so that she could start university. Barbara was at the Highlander Hotel Tavern to see a cabaret with her boyfriend and her brother Bobby on the evening of February 25th, 1977. They had plans to go to a party together later that night, but Barbara and her boyfriend got into a fight, so she left the tavern to walk to the party alone around 2 a.m. on the 26th. Barbara's body was discovered approximately 6 hours later by a man walking his dog just outside of Calgary city limits near the airport. When she was found, she was fully clothed, although her jacket was on inside out. There were bruises on her arm and neck, and the fingers on her left hand were bloody. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. There is absolutely no reason for this to happen. She didn't have any enemies, her brother Bobby told the Calgary Albertan at the time. I just can't seem to put the pieces of the puzzle together. He did note that his sister was a very trusting person, perhaps too trusting. Calgary was the site of numerous unsolved murders of young women in the late 1970s, so it was difficult to determine which, if any, of the murders had been committed by the same perpetrator. Melissa and Barbara's murders were definitively shown to have been committed by the same person in 2003. Semen had been found on both of their bodies, and DNA analysis showed that it was from the same man. There were no matches to the profile in Canada's National DNA Databank at the time. The profile was uploaded to the databank, but no matches were found for another 20 years. In 2021, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Calgary Police Service began formally working together on Melissa and Barbara's case in hopes that they could use genetic genealogy to identify the man who had killed them. Coincidentally, evidence from Patsy and Eva's case was resubmitted to the lab for forensic examination in 2022. A DNA profile was developed from the semen found on both of their bodies and entered into the National DNA Databank. A match was found. The same DNA profile was found in the semen found on the bodies of Eva, Patsy, Melissa, and Barbara. Investigators now knew that they were looking for a serial killer. By the time all 4 cases were linked, the RCMP lab had made some progress in identifying the killer they had initially been investigating for just Melissa and Barbara's murders. They had been working with Parabon Nanolabs and Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy, which had eventually led them to a potential suspect. Their investigation took them to multiple provinces in Canada and states across the border in the USA before they could confirm that he was the man they had been looking for. On May 17, 2024, the RCMP announced that DNA evidence had identified the killer of Eva Dvorak, Patsy McQueen, Melissa Rehorek, and Barbara McLean as Gary Allen Srery. Srery was born in 1942 in Oak Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He grew up as the oldest of 3 children. Sometime in the mid-1950s, his family moved to California. There, he went on to graduate high school and get married in 1960. He and his wife had a son, but got divorced in 1969. Srery's known criminal history began during his marriage. In 1965, he was found guilty of rape by force, oral copulation, sodomy, and kidnapping in Los Angeles. If he served any time for these convictions, it was very short, as he faced burglary charges less than a year after his conviction. These charges were ultimately dismissed. In 1966, he was again charged with sexually based offenses. He was charged with kidnapping and assault to commit rape, as well as sex perversion, which led to him being classified as a mentally disordered sex offender by the state of California and sentenced to mental health custody. He was charged with rape again in 1969, but was acquitted. Soon he was facing drug charges, which led to him serving time in San Quentin. He was paroled to Sonoma, California in 1972, but was in Florence, Oregon by the following year, when he was charged with, but not convicted of, kidnapping and sodomy. He was sent back to Los Angeles to serve time for violating his parole. In 1974, while still in Los Angeles, Srery was once again charged with rape. He posted bail and was released while the charges were pending. He never came to court for his scheduled appearances. It now appears that a short time after Srery was released, he illegally crossed the border into Canada. Srery then did not have any significant contact with police until 1996, when he was imprisoned for sexual assault and forcible confinement after committing a violent rape in New Westminster, British Columbia. However, authorities believed that their prisoner's name was Rex Long, one of Srery's numerous aliases. He had been able to get a driver's license using that name and receive social assistance. A tip from authorities in the U.S. led to his true identity being uncovered. Srery was deported to the United States in 2003 after completing his sentence. In 2008, Srery committed the crime that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. The victim of this crime has never been publicly identified to protect her privacy. For the sake of clarity in telling her story, and to avoid having to refer to her only as the woman or the victim, I have given her the alias of Jane in this video. Again, I would like to reiterate that while I will be referring to her as Jane, this is not her actual name. Srery met 44-year-old Jane at the Mousetrap Bar in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, on June 18, 2008. She was using crutches at the time, so he offered to give her a ride home. When they arrived at Jane's home, he attacked her. He spent the next several hours physically and sexually assaulting Jane. During the long ordeal, he raped, beat, and strangled Jane. The attack did not end until Jane's boyfriend arrived home at 5 a.m., at which point Srery fled the house but was soon apprehended by police. The attack on Jane was so brutal and violent that it caused her to have a stroke, which resulted in irreversible damage to the left side of her body. Despite the horrific assault she endured, Jane nevertheless displayed incredible bravery and character when she appeared in court for Srery's sentencing following his conviction for her rape. She now walked with a cane and had difficulty speaking, both results of the stroke Srery had caused. On the stand, she repeated Srery's name to get his attention until he was forced to look at her before she began her statement. From the stand, she told him, "I have grandchildren, I have children, I have a family that loves me very much, that has had to watch me go through living hell, and it is not fair. You damaged me, and I can't be repaired. There has got to be a lifetime sentence for you, just as I'm having to pay a lifetime sentence for no wrongdoing." Jane expressed gratitude to God that she had been the one Srery attacked that night, and that it had not been a younger woman or a teenager. She said that she had forgiven Srery, but asked the judge to impose a life sentence for the sake of protecting other women from him. The judge did so. In an interview conducted after the sentence was announced, Jane said that her first thought when she heard the sentence was, "Thank God. I felt like I had done my job. I was going to see him convicted, to save other women. Srery's life sentence ultimately was not very long, as he died of natural causes at the Idaho State Correctional Center on April 27, 2011, at the age of 68. Unfortunate timing had caused a delay in Srery being identified as the perpetrator of the murders in Canada. Srery's DNA was not uploaded to Idaho's state DNA databank until 2013. The RCMP had run their international DNA search in 2012. He was therefore not identified for over another decade, when genetic genealogy identified him as a potential suspect, and the RCMP was able to request his DNA profile from authorities in Idaho. While the murders of Patsy, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara have been solved, it is disappointing to many of the individuals who worked so diligently on the case that Srery is not alive to face justice for these crimes. It pains us that he's dead, Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie, head of the Alberta RCMP Historical Homicide Unit, said at a press conference, "I'd love nothing more than to tell you we just put handcuffs on this guy, but unfortunately, that's not the way this one ends." The investigation into Patsy, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara's case is now closed, but the investigation into Srery is far from over. Authorities are very concerned by the fact that Srery's criminal history shows very short periods of time between most of his known crimes before he came to Canada, but there are decades between the crimes that they currently know about once he crossed the border. The RCMP is currently investigating the possibility that he is responsible for more crimes, either unsolved or unreported, committed between 1974, when he illegally entered Canada, and 1996, when he was arrested in British Columbia. Knowing where Srery was living throughout this period is critical to investigating this possibility. The RCMP is working to put together a timeline of Srery's movements within Canada. They have so far been able to confirm that he was in Alberta from 1976 until 1979, when he appears to have moved to British Columbia and remained there until his 1996 arrest. In British Columbia, he lived in numerous communities, including Vancouver, Surrey, Half Moon Bay, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack. Srery's transient lifestyle is just one of the complicating factors in determining where he was throughout this period. He also generally worked off the books, often as a cook. While he seems to have always kept his hair dark, he regularly changed other details about his appearance, and he drove many different vehicles. He lived under multiple assumed names, including Willie Blackman, Travis Blackwell, and Rex Long. He is known to have been in several relationships, and some of his acquaintances have been identified, which does help with the investigation. When Srery's identification as Patsy, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara's murderer was announced, the RCMP also issued an appeal for anyone who knew Srery during this period to come forward to help develop this timeline. Within the first month, more than 50 tips were called into them. The RCMP is optimistic that they may be able to solve more crimes in both Canada and the United States by proving Srery's responsibility for them. All of Eva, Patsy, Melissa, and Barbara's parents passed away before Srery was identified as their killer. The surviving members of all 4 women's families released statements following the announcement of his identification, memorializing their lost loved one, detailing the profound impact their loss had on the lives of their family members, and thanking law enforcement for their efforts over the past nearly 50 years. In their statement, Patsy's siblings expressed their sympathy to the other families and relief that Srery can no longer hurt anyone else, writing, "This evil monster has caused so much pain and suffering for countless families." He took a piece of every one of us when he took our loved ones. We thank God that he is no longer alive and can never harm anyone else again.